They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my Dad or Fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we
were happy. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of your favorite podcast, the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. All things security, all things cyber, with a side of humor. And today I've got a great show for you guys because we're going to talk about a topic that I'm willing to bet when you think of enterprise security, most of y'all don't jump to this. I know because I didn't. And working in a large organization, we got to a place where eventually we tried to tackle the security of applications, not just stuff that we develop, but the stuff that actually runs the business. And the stuff that actually runs the business is generally things that we don't get included in. So without too much further ado, I'm going to introduce you guys as they take themselves off mute. Tom Venables, who's returning. Hey, Tom, how are you?
Good to see you, Ref.
And a long-time I've heard listener and longtime friend and somebody that I love welcoming to the show, Mr. Jay. I'm going to try to pronounce your name. You ready? I'm not Dutch, but Jay Thoden van Velzen.
Hey, that will do. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
All right. So the topic, obviously, today we're going to cover critical applications there's not many more critical applications in your environment than your SAP infrastructure. I'm willing to bet you all run it. What was the tagline, Jay, for many years ago? The best run companies run SAP or something. Was that the tagline?
I don't think we do that one anymore. Another one that I like, and there's a really cool video, is SAP, the software company your friends have never heard of.
I love that one. That's a good one. That's a good one. But so look, here's the premise, right? Security gets their hands involved in a lot of things, but when it comes down to it, there's things that if they stop functioning, the business just goes into a grinding halt. Like SAP and the critical infrastructure around it inside of a business is part of that, right? Jay, I'm going to start with you because I want you to articulate. You're probably the best to do this. What is this software, this SAP software? What does it actually do for companies? Because for my security friends that have never heard of it or aren't familiar with it.
It is. This is one that you can answer very quickly. It could take like 3 days because the portfolio ultimately
30 minutes.
goes really far. But think of it as like anything that a company does to actually operate outside of what they're known for. Right? Like say somebody makes shoes or runs an airline, but they have employees that need to be onboarded, get paid, and be assigned managers and so on, right? You need to like record what you're buying and what you're selling, right? You need to manage your supply chain. You need to manage the compliance of your business operational systems. You have travel and expense, you hire contractors. So like all of the stuff that allows you to run a business that is not like the actual making or the service provisioning, all of that is what you need to run a business and do that like internationally. Of course, it becomes more complex. So you have to deal with like tax regimes of 50 different countries, the laws of different jurisdictions. So, do you meet all the compliance? Do you have all the processes right? But also, like if you're buying something, like your manager may need to approve something that gets done, and that turns into financial statements. And
so the business of doing business.
Sorry.
So the business of actually doing business.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So Tom, this one's for you then. Doesn't that just scream like we should be protecting this ultimately? Talk to me about how security thinks about this kind of infrastructure, this kind of software. Is this something that's commonly thought about from the security perspective?
Sometimes it depends. That's a great consulting answer, as you know.
Great answer, Tom.
It depends how you what your route into security was. I started as an SAP security specialist 20-something years ago, and then moved to be more CISO aligned. But if you're not familiar with these ERP landscapes, it's very hard to understand the unique challenges of securing them. We see SAP systems especially as a bit of a black spot in the coverage of cyber initiatives, whether it's identity programs, SIM monitoring, EDR, XDR, whatever acronyms you want to throw at it. SAP is often the red-headed stepchild because a lot of people don't understand it. And the SAP teams don't necessarily speak the same language as the CISO.
So think of it this way, Raf. Like I've done things like Unix and Linux for a long time. Then you get encountered with Windows and you go like, I'm going to relearn everything and learn like the Windows 32 API. That's too much work, right? So you focus on a particular area. And a lot of cybersecurity knows about operating systems, networking, and so on. But by the time, they may even know Office products, right? Through like dealing with macros and things like that. But once it comes to SAP, like you don't even necessarily have access to that system. So it's not something that you use or that you know. So if somebody says like, what's this thing? Like, SAP, what is this? Does it do? Like it does payroll. Okay. What does that mean? Right? Yeah. Like there's no handle that you have. Like, can we just put like, an XDR agent on it? Are we good then? It's like, no, that has no understanding of the function of the application beyond the operating system.
So that's the interesting part for me, because I know, looking back at the companies I've worked for on the enterprise side, that at least 3/4 of them ran SAP and similar supply chain tools. I can tell you with absolute certainty that 3 out of 4 of those the security team never touched, beyond put an agent on the system that it ran on, whatever our antivirus, anti-malware, whatever agent was, and then the network itself, right? The IDS, IPS at the time, NDR now, and that's it. Like whatever was on that box, we're like, good luck. I mean, it's just another piece of software. But when you think about the different avenues of attack or the value to an attacker, it's contacts, it's business disruption, it's trade secrets. I mean, there's so much. It's literally a treasure trove of data, and security doesn't seem to be doing a very good job of protecting that environment.
Well, hold on, because that depends on what you mean by security. Is it the cybersecurity team? Not so much, right? They may do the firewalling, networking, and XDR agent just to make sure that you get covered. But there is the magical SAP basis administrator, right? So there's an ecosystem of people who know SAP, who know how to administer it, that we as a company speak to directly with, SAP security notes that are things that are meaningful to them within the context of the application, right? There's an ecosystem of security compliance or GRC tooling based around that, as well as offerings that we have to help our customers run these landscapes more securely. So it's more that it's in a different location rather than that it's not being done at all.
Okay, let's unpack that. Let's unpack that a little bit, guys. When I say SAP security, or I talk about supply chain security with regard to SAP, like what does that mean? Because there's administering the software package and all the add-ons and everything itself. I'm sure there's other things. So I don't know. I'm sure a lot of listeners don't know. talk to me about, unpack that for me. What does that mean to protect that critical piece of software?
So you've got the same protections that you would apply to any other application, but as Jay highlighted, probably managed by another team. So you've still got operating system patching, you've still got application level patching, although we will talk more about why that's difficult for SAP customers, I'm sure. You've got access governance, you've got segregation of duties that you need to maintain to limit what people can do within the application. And that's a complex area in itself. But then you've got your cyber monitoring. You know, what is actually happening in your application logs? Are you ingesting those to see if you've got an indicator of compromise? Are you monitoring for indicators of fraud? A ransomware attack against an SAP system is going to shut down business operations, as we've highlighted. So are you hardening your databases? Are you applying all the same protect, detect, respond, recover controls to that system?
And even are you designing your business processes in a way that is secure, right? One really cool way of thinking of MFA is if you want to buy something, but your manager needs to approve, right? So that's in a way an own multi-factor authentication where somebody needs to say, okay, this is a legitimate business expense, but you do have to set that up. Otherwise, people could just like buy whatever they want at like no cost control. So like it's not just the security of the application to make sure there's like no SQL injection or like overprivileged accounts, but it also like the setup and use of the application in a way that you meet certain compliance business rules to prevent fraud or like misuse of the application. Like, you know, you shouldn't be able to simply say like, "Ooh, send me, you know, a certain transaction to my bank account," right? Like there should be oversight, and that you need to configure that in the system. So that's on top of what we might normally think of things like patching.
So let's start at the bottom. Where the software runs on what? Unix, Linux, Windows? Where do you put it?
So you can run it on premise. SAP has this weird thing where we always said like customers choose winners, not SAP. So we run on every operating system. We run on just about every database, although we do have a preference of our own. And you can even get it in like 3 different types of clouds, 4 different types of clouds. Okay. So then you got to add cloud expertise to this as well.
Yes.
Presumably.
And operational technology interfaces with SAP. You've got mobile devices. You've got people walking around a warehouse with a pick list who need to authenticate. You've got people working on North Sea oil rigs who are wearing gloves and can't scan their fingerprints. So that impacts it.
Cash registers that log in before the cash register unlocks. Like it's maybe like because we started with like these business operations that seem internal, right? But like this branches out everywhere. So this could be like online catalogs and digital transactions. It could be point of sale cash registers in the supermarket. It is the distribution center where something comes in, gets to a shelf, then gets put on another truck and sent somewhere, right? So like it has real world implications that go beyond like, is my supplier getting paid? But also like, is it going to the right place? Is it ending up in customs? And do we know while it's hitting customs, you know, when it's going to get cleared and gets on another truck so that it finally gets into our facility? So like a lot of it is ultimately about physical goods, real physical processes, things moving, and of course services delivered.
Guys, that is a crap ton of complexity when it comes to so let me ask this, because
which is also, by the way, why these things are separate, right? Like you get this SAP basis administrator needing to do like this entire ecosystem, and many of them will like start or roll into that career and never get out, right?
Yeah.
Versus somebody else that rolls into system administration but never sees that world, right? Like because the amount of things, and especially because each implementation at customer drives very specific business processes, right? It's not even, it's like, you know, the technology, but you're kind of like resolving problems in different places, either through custom code or like our BTP platform, to glue things together and then build applications on top of these backend systems.
So what you're saying, Jay, is that this isn't something that's going to be handled by the enterprise security team necessarily. This is specialized work within ecosystem.
I have not encountered a single place where the enterprise security team does anything more than ask the SAP team to collaborate, do certain things that the whole company needs to do, and then hopefully have a dialogue about how to integrate some of the SAP alerts into the larger landscape.
Yeah. I tend to think of it as, from that enterprise point of view, you might be looking at 10% of your IT landscape. So if you're thinking about your architectural diagram, maybe only 10% of it is dedicated to SAP. But if you were looking at your data architecture or your process architecture, it's 90%. And so an awful lot of risk sits within that 10%. So there needs to be a little bit more joined up thinking.
So talk to me about this then, because I'm immediately concerned that the way you would some companies, as they, whether they're already having installed and depend on it or they're switching to it, right? This would be something that the security team wouldn't necessarily be involved in beyond the typical, like, hey, there's a piece of software coming in, validate the system, make sure that the basics are covered, and then this other team is going to take care of the rest. Is there an entire world of policy, practice, procedure, best practice kind of stuff and tooling that is now in the SAP world? Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's paid my bills for 20 years. It's very linked. Like, what we tend to see from an enterprise level is a little bit less of the sort of CISO agenda being applied to SAP, but a lot of the GRC and financial controlling functions and the chief risk officers, they're looking very closely at this because they understand the business processes that it's running.
Huh. Okay. So this is just another instance to me of specialized security being done outside the purview of the general security team. And this makes a really good case for, people are talking about the way security organizations are going to evolve, where policy and governance kind of sit at the central security team, and the execution of those things lives in the various functions. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine. I can't imagine the security of something like the SAP ecosystem being done anywhere else. And does that model work?
Like there's a decent parallel with like OT security.
Okay.
Right? Like obviously that's like real, like physical machines and stuff, but like a lot of the times SAP systems are kind of in some way connected to these physical machines and have the same sort of requirements. Like you don't just shut down a production line, because to bring that back up is just a freaking nightmare, and the amount of cost involved is just not fun, right? That's kind of the same with SAP systems, right? Like, just like you don't want to shut down a production line, you don't have output and you have like rising inputs taking up shelf space. The administration of that is in SAP systems, right? So you can essentially create the same problems by having outage. Like one of the challenge that is often the contention between cyber teams and SAP teams is that the cyber team says, like, you need to patch your stuff.
I figured we'd get there eventually.
SAP team says, like, yeah, it's on the schedule. Like, when is it going to happen? Well, like January 15th, but it's only August now. Yeah, but we have September rolling into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then we do inventory in January. So that patch is going to come in in mid-January,
but we're damn good
or
already.
it needs to be done like in the summer, right? Like, so you get different considerations, and it would have to go to pretty severe levels of like, okay, we really need to do this active in the wild, like, need to patch now. But then you'd have to negotiate not just with a head of IT that says, can you roll out this Windows patch, right? And force that on. But like, you would have to sit down and negotiate any necessary downtime. And if there's any indication that that might not have gone right, they will roll back instantly and you get your next chance next time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Tom. Because you mentioned it, like we'll talk about patching later, and I've been thinking about it. I'm glad you said it. So this is sort of like the parallel between a production line and this is because there are so many inputs, you can't pause those inputs easily, right?
Yeah.
Obviously queuing mechanisms and stuff like that, but like restarting a thing like this, you got to figure out, when the system comes back up, are all those queuing mechanisms that have been holding data flushing properly? Is the output sane? I can imagine that takes some time because you have to.
Some of it runs on an in-memory database that needs to warm itself up from disk, and some of these are multi-terabyte size landscapes, so that takes hours to get back up on a restart.
Okay.
And for those hours, trucks stop moving. They receive their shipping instructions. Like stock is not going out the door. Supermarket shelves are empty. It's a significant impact.
So
and you can even do something like, we do it overnight. Like, it's fine if you're only operating in the US and you literally shut
in one
down
time zone.
6, but like nobody runs like that anymore. So there's always someone that's going to infect it somewhere.
So, all right, let's talk about that then for a second, because that is a terrifying way to operate, right? Because we get 0 days for the operating systems all the time. We get
yes and no, right? Like, in the abstract, yes. In the real, there are a number of limiting factors. First of all, there's not that many adversaries that know how to do SAP.
Yeah,
it goes both ways, right? It's not just not that many techies know, like on the blue side, but on the red side is limited. There's not to say that they're not there, and the ones that are there can be highly sophisticated.
And it is growing.
Also, the availability of access to a system like that is fairly restricted normally, right? Like,
you'd hope.
We all grow up with Linux and Windows, and you can play around, you learn a lot of stuff. You don't have access to an SAP system unless you work for large corporations. You don't have access to the system itself unless you're one of, a few number of SAP basis consultants or administrators who make a 15-20% premium over a regular IT department, right? So it goes both ways. Like, there's you can count the amount of like Windows malware, like go count the amount of SAP malware. It's a little bit of a different.
Got it. Fair enough.
Right? And because we're not generally like public facing, like either it's an on-premise system that lives inside of a customer landscapes or as a cloud solution, but you have to be a large corporation to even be able to get access to it.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking candidly, it's not a cheap solution, right? It is larger organizations that run this. There's a data sheet out there. I think $46 trillion annually flows through SAP. In any given day, 87% of every transaction processed globally hits SAP. If you've got a phone in your pocket, it was probably manufactured by an SAP customer.
Guys, why are we not here? So why don't I hear about this more? I mean, Tom, obviously you and I started chatting.
One thing, and I'm like, this is an open door, so I'm just going to kick it in. It's like, one thing is that like not that many things happen, right? Like, we're not the guys where like, every other week you hear of a significant CVE that lead to breaches, right? We're of course also obsessed about this because we understand very well the responsibility that we have. But if you look for tech companies' news about like breaches and vulnerabilities, knock wood, we're generally doing okay, right? Like we have 750 people in the Central Security and Compliance Organization and several thousand more in the business units embedded in the developer organization. So we do a lot of things to make sure that the product itself is already pretty good. And then we have the ecosystem of partners that are in that sort of SAP security world, that both by either working with customers directly or their own security research, find things in the landscape, let us know, we bring that out. We run a bug bounty program and so on. But to a certain extent, the fact that you don't hear that much, I feel a little proud.
That's a good thing.
Didn't hear that much about this stuff.
Yeah,
so
we've spoken about this before, Jay, but there really is no Mandiant for SAP. There's no organization that is publishing their findings around these breaches. So you might have customer data leaked from an SAP customer, but they might not trace it back to the SAP system. It might be their CRM or their Salesforce or whatever they're operating alongside that. So Jay's absolutely right. You don't see the headlines about it, so it doesn't get the traction, but it needs more attention.
Tom, let me ask you, I'll just forgive me for asking, but this is a sort of a self-serving question. I'm interested. As an SAP security consultant, what do you do? Like, what do you actually do? What's the service?
So we're looking at the moment, there is a big move to the next version of SAP. Everybody's migrating onto either cloud-hosted or on-premise versions of what's called S/4HANA. And we're supporting those migrations and making sure that they're configuring the system securely, that they've thought about all their network infrastructure, their hosting, their antivirus, everything that applies to securing a large-scale application like this. The vast majority of my time is spent within the application, securing the business processes themselves and making sure that they're set up to operate securely and compliantly.
That whole not able to commit fraud or other kind of violations of GRC function. Okay.
Because what's an external threat to the system these days? Like we see everywhere, over 85% of breaches are caused by some compromise of identity. If I'm compromising an SAP user that's got authority to go and sign a 50 million check.
That's rough.
And
I can imagine
that's what the attackers are realizing.
Yeah.
And that's why I mentioned, by the way, this sort of MFA of like these manager approvals, right? Where you build 4-eye review into the system, so that even if an individual's credentials were leaked, you still need another person's cooperation to get it to that next step.
Okay. So one last question, because this is I don't want to close off without asking, what kind of telemetry is the SAP infrastructure, I guess this is for you, Jay, providing into the broader security team to be able to do detect and respond type of activities? I'm assuming there's logging of some kind, right? What are you providing?
So obviously we provide the logs themselves, but like the reality is that you have to be a little bit SAP knowledgeable to make sense of that. Like we provide some solutions that do threat detection, as well as other partner ecosystem solutions that help react to that, so that you can actually flag either high-risk configurations or things that are happening in the landscape that are like weird, that need to be looked after. Like the classic one is like SAP _all is essentially root of the landscape. So like that's one of the first places that you would go to see if there's like anybody with like SAP all authorizations that shouldn't have happened. That's almost, if that's not your like SAP basis admin themselves, then very quickly you go like, okay, we have a problem, right? So it's really, first of all, like the IAM stuff, and then of course keep the landscape as patched and updated as much as possible as well.
Okay.
You've hit on a really common problem, which is the volume of data that these logs generate. There's about 27 logs running in an SAP system at any one time, from syslog, applog, RFC gateways, and communications. Ingesting that data into your typical SIM is very, very difficult. Building your detection patterns.
I was going to ask that, yeah.
Just the ingestion charges that we see customers have. I work with customers where their total log volume was in like 16 terabytes.
Oh.
So,
wow.
Yeah, what Jay's talking about there is you need a solution that pre-filters that, finds your IOCs. You can then import those into your SIM and get that enrichment so you can combine it with your network telemetry. But it is a real challenge for customers.
All right, maybe we do a follow-up for this
We
show.
have to. We haven't even talked about clout yet.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a follow-up. But I want to, Jay, maybe that's you that we can do this with. But I want to talk about in our follow next episode that we do on this. I want to talk about like hunting, you know, or identifying threats and threat hunting in the actual environment itself. Like
Actually, Tom will be better for that than me, because
I'm perfect.
More like below the application. So
got
like
it.
Cloud landscapes, infrastructure, networks, and stuff. We could probably like tag team a little bit, like what he's seeing.
Let's do this again, guys. Let's do this again. All right, folks. I'm going to end it there because we are out of time. This has been information dense for sure. I learned a ton of things. Hopefully you've learned a ton of things too. And maybe you go back and after you're done listening to this episode and check in with your SAP team in your environment and maybe take them out for coffee, because that's an entirely new world to me, and probably to you.
Do that, by the way. Do that.
Yeah, definitely. That's a place you want to go. All right, we will definitely do a follow up. This has been great. Tom, thanks for joining us again. Jay, mountains of information. Thanks so much. I love the hat. And folks, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have learned something, and I hope that you will join us again when we obviously do the next episode. But we will do a follow up on this. If you have questions for Tom or Jay, use the LinkedIn when I post this, use the LinkedIn group, drop them in there. I think that it would be fun to answer some of your environmentally specific questions. We can anonymize them if you'd like. You just DM me, and we'll take it from there. So for the podcast, thanks you guys so much for listening. We'll catch you another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast.